When building out your HYROX training program, you should really be thinking about what you want to accomplish 2 weeks before your race and not what you want to be like on race day. I'll explain exactly what I mean about that in this video. I'm also going to help you figure out exactly how to show up for your next race in the best fitness possible. My name is Rich Ryan. I'm a 3-time HYROX Elite 15 World Championships qualifier with a HYROX Pro PR of 54:28. The first step in building a HYROX training program is the end date, like literally when is the race. Next, you have to set your goal. The goal should not be outcome based. You should not have a set time. I want to run XYZ time by XYZ date because it's just hard to project. This sets you up for frustration and potentially lose your confidence going into your race, which is the opposite effect that training should have. So set your goal around something you want to accomplish in training. You want to spend X amount of time in training zone. You want to do X amount of volume. Whatever that is, make sure the plan goal is based around training and not an outcome. So let's just say you want to accomplish a goal of doing 60 minutes of a HYROX effort at a high output, or you want to spend 60 minutes at zone 4 in a HYROX workout. So now that you have the goal, everything that you plan can be pointed directly toward that. So this is the first part of figuring out where you want to go. So now everything you do is to reach that set goal. So let's jump back to the beginning. Now we need to build a week of training. Once you build 1 week, you could build 2 weeks and then 3 weeks and then so forth all the way through. But you need to know what to do like right now. Before you can get started, you have to know what you're going to do. It doesn't matter what that end goal is if you cannot structure what your workout's going to be today, tomorrow, the next day, throughout a week. For the sake of this conversation, we are going to talk about a 7-day cycle. There are a lot of ways you can move around your training cycles, but I'd recommend just keeping it 7 for simplicity. It just works better with our current structure in life. So we're just going to stick with Monday through Sunday. So if we're looking at our week, we need to know what to do throughout the course of that week. So the most important part of HYROX training for elites and beginners is our aerobic function. We want to be able to carry oxygen to our muscles while under fatigue. That's what's going to make the difference in a good race versus a great race. So when building a program, that's where we need to be most intentional. You can't just squeeze in your aerobic training because you need to be very intentional on how much time it's actually going to take. So this needs to take priority when building out your microcycle training plan. I suggest there's some kind of aerobic component 5 out of the 7 days in your cycle. That doesn't mean that it's 5 easy aerobic days, and I will explain further in the next chapter. The first place I would recommend with these remaining 2 days is rest. Being cautious with your training is the best way to improve your longevity, which ultimately is going to decide your ceiling as a HYROX athlete. A huge mistake I see athletes make is trying to cram so much work in 1 week just on top of each other. And this will work for a short amount of time, but it's probably going to lead to injury or burnout. Everyone's tried it at some point, and if it worked well for everybody would just do a ton of work. But ultimately, you will hit a point where you can't do any more and your progress will regress. Think about it this way. Your HYROX results will be better if you train 5 days a week for 3 years versus 7 days a week for 3 months. You might find an initial bump, but ultimately it's not going to get you where you want to go for the long haul. So take your time, don't be crazy when it comes to training load, and give yourself space to rest within your weekly schedule. So strength is a key component to HYROX, and it can and should probably be part of your HYROX training program, but it doesn't have to be. I believe we can get stronger or maintain strength just by adding HYROX elements into our conditioning work, like a compromised running workout or a HYROX specific workout. The caveat with this is that you already need to have the required strength to do the HYROX work. Like if you have a decade of bodybuilding or CrossFit or some sort of strength training under your belt, you can actually lose a little bit of strength and still have more than the required strength for HYROX. So you can put strength training into your HYROX plan, but don't feel like you have to put it in. So for the sake of this training program, I'm going to define strength work as something that has sets and reps with extended rest. This wouldn't mean like a CrossFit Metcon or a HYROX work where things are going to be very aerobic while you're doing strength work. So if you need to work on the strength outputs for HYROX performance, if you want to maintain a certain level of strength or your physique or whatever it is and you want to do strength work, you can add it into these last 2 days. You could also add in more strength work across the board. As long as you don't replace one of those 5 aerobic pieces, then your strength work is fine. You could do strength 4 to 5 days per week as long as it's not interfering with the amount of time that you have for aerobic. So if you're between 2 workouts and you choose the strength, that's not going to be helpful for your HYROX performance. So make sure that you keep those 5 aerobic component pieces, and then you could add strength as much as you want, but only if you're meeting your aerobic goals. And finally, you could add more aerobic work. You do it every single day. The thing with aerobic work is that you will be able to complete the work because it's low intensity and not necessarily know if you're overcooking yourself. So I suggest you be cautious when adding in more aerobic work and still starting with that 5 and then slowly adding in a 6th and maybe every other week. giving yourself time to understand how well you're recovering. I'd also recommend you do aerobic work outside of just running. We all want to get better at running for HYROX, but it's very destructive and can lead to some injuries and long-term setbacks. So doing things like cycling, swimming, machine work, whatever that is, that's going to help boost your aerobic system on those other days, you can do that. You can also do multiple aerobic workouts in one day. But again, make sure you're able to recover between each session. Now we have our 7 days. Once we have that, we can simply repeat it week after week. But before we can repeat this, we need to know what we're doing. So for the sake of this video, we're going to talk about how to put your quality days and rest days in place in this 7-day cycle. So I mentioned before that not all 5 of your aerobic component days should be easy zone 2 days. I would suggest that 1 or 2 days per week, you're doing some sort of quality session with a big aerobic chunk. A HYROX quality session to me is going to be between 30 and 70 minutes. So to do that much work, we're going to be aerobic for the most part. We might be riding that line between aerobic and anaerobic, which would be the goal, but it's going to be much more of an aerobic component than a high-end strength or an anaerobic workout. So that leaves 3 of the next 5 aerobic component days as easy days. These are your zone 2 days where you're just going to be steady state, low output work that you're just spending time building your aerobic capacity. So make sure these efforts don't exceed zone 3 and your RPE is going to be a 5 or 6 or so out of 10. Now you have your 7 days, you have your 2 quality days, you have your aerobic days, you know what you're going to do on those 2 other days, and then you just repeat that cycle over and over. This is where progression comes in. Let's rewind to the beginning of the video where I talked about needing to be done with your goal 2 weeks before your actual race event. So say we want to accomplish a HYROX workout that is 60 minutes long at a high output. We need to have that done 2 weeks prior to our race because we need to be able to rest and recover and taper our way into the event. So although the race might be 12 weeks from now, we need to be done with our training at the highest point 10 weeks from the event. If we continue to pull our high-end efforts closer to our race, we're going to be less ready to perform, therefore making all this training not worth it at the end of the day because we're not going to perform the way that we want to when it comes to the race. So our target goal is actually 10 weeks from now. But we have our goal, we have our date, we have our week. Now we can start planning to hit that goal of 60 minutes of high-end work. So say we want to hit that goal of 60 minutes in 10 weeks and we're starting at 0. This means we could add 6 minutes of quality work at that HYROX effort per week. Starting at 6 minutes of hard work is definitely doable, but each week at 12, 18, 24, each time you get past that marker where you were before, it's going to be very physically and mentally challenging. That's why it's really important to do small incremental jumps and not big chunks of time. So if you start and you're like, I'm going to start with 40 minutes. By 20 minutes, you might just be done. And those last 20 minutes, you're just dragging and you're not making the progress that you want to make. The effort drops down and you're not going to be able to hit that goal as intended. You'll get the work done, but you're not going to be able to do the work to the best of your ability. A big mistake people make in progression are making jumps too aggressively. The goal of training is to hit your workouts. If you don't hit one workout, you won't hit the next one in your progression. So making it challenging but doable is very, very important when it comes to picking your spots and adding each week. Making sure you can do it so you can check that off and move on to the next challenge. So in HYROX training, if you're within 8 to 12 weeks of your race, I would say progressing your quality session like we just covered is going to take priority. If you're outside of that 8 to 12 week, then you can start to progress your strength or your running volume in a safe way and build up a higher base of strength or aerobic capacity and then layer on this intensity on top. But it's really hard to add volume in your run total and your aerobic total and your quality session total and your strength total and not come out feeling beat. So picking one thing that you're going to progress at a time is key when it comes to figuring out what your goals are for your training block. So now that we have all of our goals in place, we want to talk about some best practices in these training programs. One thing that you'll see often is considered a deload week. This is planned rest where you are going to get ahead of the recovery by planning a week of training that has a reduction in volume and intensity. I would suggest a cut of about 30% across intensity and volume is a great place for your deload week every 3 to 4 weeks. Now, deload week is not necessary, but it is just a good practice. If you are on top of your recovery metrics like your resting heart rate data, your sleep data, and just are feeling good and your workouts are progressing each week and you're getting better, then you might not need to take a deload week. But oftentimes people will just push through and will get to the point of like burning out and not getting better during their training, and it's already a little bit too late. So having this planned rest is a great way to boost your ability to perform better. So it might not feel like you are progressing during this deload week, but ultimately it's going to help you become better and make your ceiling higher. So now that you have your week, your block, your deload, your progression all set in motion, now what you need to do is build your workouts. And this is the fun part. You can be very creative on that end, or you can take a look at programs like the RMR Training app and community. We have over 500 workouts in our RMR app with nearly a dozen different training programs that have progressions built out to help you either build a bigger base or perform at your best for your next race. So drop a note or any questions that you have about building out your next HYROX training program down below, and I'll talk to you soon.